Hare Krishna and good evening, dear devotees. Thank you so much for joining us for the 20th episode of the Many Moons podcast. Tonight we have got Uttama and Partha Prabhu with us, and they're going to be talking about creating connection. They recently returned from their international travels in which they offered various courses about the Grihastha ashram. We're very fortunate that they're with us tonight as they really are relationship experts. They've got many years of experience counseling devotees in their family life. And of course, they've also been married for many years. So to share a little bit more about them, they got married in 1971 and they were initiated together by Srila Prabhupada in 1973. They've got 3 grandchildren and they've got 8 grandchildren. Partha, with the help of Uttama, spent 19 years engaged as a head pujari in Vancouver, Canada, and Uttama also served in the Gurukul. After moving to Shakranagati Dham, a rural community not far from Vancouver, Uttama served as the president and other board positions for 20 years. Together, they also ran a Bhagavad Gita study group. So when they observed the very high divorce rate in the ISKCON community, they decided to train as marital educators. In 2004, they, along with others, became the founding members of the Grihastha Vision team. Currently, they are traveling globally and they're doing marriage seminars and they also do mentorship and training. So post-pandemic, they're also mentoring many people online and they're also offering premarital education online. And they're also the co-authors, along with other of the Grihastha Vision team members, of Heart and Soul Connection, Devotional Guide to Marriage, Service and Love. I have read this book myself and I can definitely highly recommend it. So welcome, Uttama and Partha. We're very grateful for you taking some of your precious time being with us tonight. I hope you're well after your travels and all your teaching.
Thank you.
By Krishna's grace, somehow we are.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's start with our discussion tonight. As I said, we are speaking about creating connection, and we really want to understand what it means to have a connection in our romantic relationship in the Grihastha ashram. So how would you define a connection? What is a connection?
You know, connection is we might have, just thinking about it, if I had to reword that title, I would put recreating connection, because actually we're all integrally connected with each other because we're all connected with Krishna. So a big part of perceiving and developing better connection is to understand, the essence of how important connection is. And so seen is understood to be like a feeling between the two of you, that you feel like the other person understands you and gets you and sees you. Because one of the integral needs of a living entity is to be understood. So when we feel understood by the other person, we tend to feel connected. Do you want to add on to that?
I was just going to, sometimes devotees think, and it's actually stated in our Shastra, that love is only for Krishna. So what does that mean? Love is only for Krishna. And it's not that statement excludes our relationship with others. You'll find many different statements where Prabhupada says different things which sometimes seem contradictory. And Prabhupada was giving a lecture, I believe it was in Hawaii, and he was describing what love was. And he began by saying, why does everyone love their body? They take so much care of their body, their health, exercise, diet. He says, why do we do that? And he said, it's because of the presence of the soul that we care for this body. And he said, why do we care for the soul? He said, we care for the soul because it's connected to Krishna. And then he said, similarly, we care for others, our family, our community. And he said, why? He said, because of the presence of the soul. And again, he said, the soul is connected to Krishna. And then he said, in this way, that love goes to Krishna. So from that, we can understand by all of us having healthy, warm, reciprocal relationships of bhakti, that's actually also an offering of love to Krishna. And it's very much, I think it's very important to understand that the manifestation of our Krishna consciousness, of our spirituality, will be in how we interact with others. If I'm interacting very nicely with people, if we interact very nicely with people in the temple or when we're out on the street distributing books, but we go in our ashrams or our private settings and sometimes we behave in different ways with the people we're most familiar with. So why is that disconnect there? Because we're not actually connected. Because if we were actually connected, if we actually could see that everyone, and especially those closest to us, are part and parcel of Krishna, are extremely important to Krishna, and our duty is to respect and honor and care for and love them. And in that way, that love actually goes full cycle. So that connection is very important and very integral to our spiritual life, because without that connection, it would basically be impersonalism. And Krishna is never alone. He's never alone. He's always with the cows, with the gopis, the cowherd boys. He's always with his devotees.
And we can see that we have that need because when we don't feel good connections with others, especially with our romantic partners, we feel this pain and this loss because we're actually psychologically wired to connect with Krishna and to connect with others.
Thank you so much for a very beautiful answer. I appreciated that the essence of connection is feeling understood. And then I think also if you want connection, there needs to be that effort to understand the other person and to see the other person first. And I think it's very valuable that Partha Prabhu shared how, as Srila Prabhupada put it, I can't remember which part of the Bhagavatam it is, but it's in a purport in the Bhagavatam where he writes that we should connect soul to soul through the super soul. So it's important to see that it's part of our practice of devotional service and it's part of our existence of devotees to connect, but to connect on a level which we acknowledge the other person's identity as a soul and also their connection to Krishna. So that was really beautiful and inspiring for me to hear.
Thank you.
Another thing I wanted to pick up was we often hear the words connection, attraction, and attachment sort of being used either synonymously or in conjunction, really. So, what really are the differences, or what is the difference between connection, attraction, and then attachment?
We lost part of the question. You're asking what are the differences between connection?
Connection and attachment?
Yes, connection, attachment, and attraction.
Mm-hmm. Connection and attachment are pretty much synonymous. It's just that we also have we also understand from our scriptures that some attachments are negative. And so I think that sometimes devotees have a hard time distinguishing what's a wrong type of attachment. And so we may inadvertently try to not be attached, and then we don't actually connect on a level that's satisfying. So attraction usually is involuntary. It's just something that your psyche, your nervous system, your just kind of pops up. Oh, I feel attracted to this person. We just don't know for what reasons and if it's lasting. So there's nothing wrong with attraction. It may be a signal that, oh, I would, go well with this person. But it isn't a conclusion. So attraction does have to be given some time to see if the compatibility is favorable. So I would say that attraction is largely hormonal based.
That's very interesting, Prabhu. So, from what you're saying, is attraction is that involuntary feeling of, oh, I like somebody. So, sometimes people equate attraction to connection. So, we shouldn't, from what you were saying, I'm gathering that we shouldn't necessarily conflate the two, or just because you're attracted to someone, it might not be that you've got that deeper connection. A connection, I understand, is something perhaps you need to cultivate a little bit more. It might start from an attraction, but it needs to be cultivated a little bit more, because an attraction doesn't necessarily mean good connection. Am I right, or am I just assuming things?
You're right. And also, it doesn't mean that because there isn't an initial attraction, that you may not be able to make a nice connection. Did you?
Especially in the beginning of a relationship, there tends to be attraction, and that's actually based on chemistry and the production of hormones like oxytocin and dopamine, and it creates a very what they call the honeymoon stage of a relationship or a marriage, and that can last for several months, several years, and it's a normal stage in marriage, and eventually that physiological stage that's based upon those hormones, eventually it subsides, and then you're at that point you're facing the real you. You begin to really understand each other, and at that point couples begin to understand they do have differences. In the romantic stage, you tend to overlook the differences. When that romantic stage folds up, couples begin to discover their differences, and unfortunately, many couples don't have the knowledge and the skills to navigate that stage of the relationship and how to respect those differences and honor them and learn how to work together with them to work as a team. And that can be a cause of a lot of conflict in marriage and also a cause of many divorces. So having the proper knowledge of the different stages of marriage, one can see that's simply a natural growing stage. And with proper skills and knowledge, one can move beyond the chemistry to the real meaning of love, which is bhakti and service together. And then the attraction happens in a more spiritual way. And Srila Prabhupada once said how this sense of attraction and affection, he said it's not something that can be abnegated. It's something you can't squash or deny. He actually described it as a need of the soul. And one purport in this. So he didn't just say it was something important, but he said it was the need of the soul. Just like I have a pulse, and the pulse is a symptom that I'd like. Actually, he said, his exact words, affection was a symptom of life. That was his exact words. So a pulse is a symptom that I'm alive. So similarly, especially in a relationship of marriage, if there is that healthy sense of affection and bhakti mutually reciprocated, there's going to be that feeling of affection, and the marriage will thrive. And if that sense of connection and affection diminishes, the relationship can either become unhealthy or possibly veer towards separation or divorce. So it's very important to cultivate that proper sense of affection and attraction, which is based upon mutual service, love, and respect.
No, that's a really important point. With that in mind, Prabhu, you mentioned the importance of, how we cultivate that connection, and how important it is for people to be able to navigate through that sort of honeymoon period and to the different stages of a relationship. With that in mind, how do we, or how do couples create that positive connection? Because you mentioned through affection and through bhakti, but is there any other things that couples can do in order to create that positive connection between a couple, between each other?
Yes, because in order to create something, that's a verb, right? Like love is. They often say that love is a verb. It's not just some state of being that. So it requires endeavor. And I would say a big part of it is consistency in our actions. Kindness is a huge one. Just simply being kind. To be able to easily apologize for our mistakes and to change our behavior, not just apologize and keep doing the same wrong thing. I think we also have to have acceptance. Some things about him are just never going to change, and I have to accept that and, be okay with it. And openness is also a big one, to be, open, because how are you going to connect if you don't, if you aren't open with each other? And it's things like care and understanding and just being present for the person. And, a big one, and we found that just being able to verbalize or show in some way our appreciation for the other person goes a long way to helping that connection flourish.
Thank you, Prabhu. That was a lot of good tips, being kind to each other, not being afraid to apologize. Actually, I was reading this article about, this couple that they were saying one of the reasons why, despite the trials and tribulations that they sustained that sometimes difficult marriage was that the ability to forgive and to accept each other as they are. And she said, it took them years, but it went from her being technically annoyed with her husband for 4 days to being annoyed to a couple of hours. And she said that was
Yeah.
progress, because she was able to forgive. So it might not be forgiving and never making somebody's actions bother you, but actually there's little steps. I found it quite interesting, being able to not being able to let it go for 4 days and being able to let it go in a couple of hours was what she called
That's
progress.
advancement. That's
Yeah,
advancement.
That's
Thank
spiritual
you, Prabhu.
advancement. That's spiritual advancement because she has learned to become tolerant and patient
Exactly.
and humble, which are the qualities you need. And and like you say, how she went from years to or months for getting over it to a matter of hours. So what happens when tolerance is tempered with love? It becomes patience.
It's not just gritting your teeth.
Yes, not just gritting your teeth, but it becomes patient. It becomes easier to deal with the things.
And like
Thank
you were
you.
saying, all relationships have difficulties, and every couple fights. That doesn't define whether your relationship is good or not. What distinguishes happy couples from unhappy couples is that they learn how to fight a little bit cleaner, maybe more in the mode of goodness, not say the nasty things too much, and how to repair quickly. So in your example, they've learned how to repair, and so they can move on. Because if you don't repair, you start to build up this negative sentiment override where it colors your vision of everything the person says and does.
And I also read somewhere actually, you should never go to bed angry or angry with each other or wake up angry with each other or something. So essentially, to kind of learn to let go and not hold on to things really.
Yes. However, if you're really angry, it's not maybe a good time to discuss things. And if you need to go to bed and calm down, that could work too.
Thank you so much. It's been very interesting hearing from you thus far. Just for myself, give a quick summary. I did really appreciate that you mentioned earlier that attraction can be a phase and it can be indicative that you are compatible with someone. But I think you phrased it very nicely, Uttama Prabhu. You said you should observe it, which I think is a very healthy response, because sometimes with the devotee community, when a devotee experiences attraction, then there's a lot of self-judgment and deprivation and almost a negative reaction towards the attraction, and trying to get away from the attraction or suppress the attraction. But I think it's wise what you said, like observe it, and see, understand it, and see where it's going. So I like that. And I also like that Partha Prabhu was emphasizing that it's part of, it's like a phase in the relationship, which I think is very important. And you also need to realize that after that phase, where you are so attracted to the person that you are overlooking the differences and the challenges, comes another phase in which the differences and the challenges might become very prominent. But to understand that it's just a phase and that you need to work through it. And then what you emphasized, to work through it, you emphasized with Uttama Prabhu, that it's a practice, like creating a connection. It's not about a feeling, but it's actually a practice that you need to commit to, like you commit to sadhana, and that there will be breaks in it, because both of you mentioned that there can be conflict. And it's not that we want a relationship that's conflict free, but we need to learn how to repair our relationship and our connection, and how to do so in the mode of goodness. It's like it sounds like relationships are a real art to master.
Not so much art to master, but I think in modern culture we tend to have a sense of entitlement. That happiness should just come to me, and I shouldn't have to work on it. But relationships, you do have to work on relationships. Like you do have to work on your spiritual life. You do have to work on always improving your chanting, and you do. It's very important to understand that a relationship, it's not something static, but it's very dynamic, and we always have to be looking how to refine the relationship. So I guess in a sense it is an art, but it's not some mysterious art or artistic. But I think anyone who has the will to work on the relationship, they can improve the relationships.
Yes, definitely. Now, going a little bit deeper into connection, what are different types of intimacy that is important for couples to create? Because sometimes we might have a limited understanding of what means connection. We might think it's only about feeling emotionally connected, but is there more paths or more ways in
Sometimes
which
and some people think it's emotionally connected. Some people might think it's sexually connected. But there's actually, just like Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains, we all need, emotional connection. We need social connection. We need shared activities. We need even physical connection that's not necessarily sexual. We need an intellectual connection. We need that also. And my husband quite often explains it as an equation.
Yeah, it's just like mathematics. You might have an equation with different factors. And to get the correct sum of the equation, you have to carefully and accurately make sure you calculate all the different factors. Then you get the right sum. So similarly, in a relationship, there's these different factors of intimacy and connection. And they all have to be looked at in a very holistic way. Because if you leave some of them out or miscalculate them, it can be problematic. We've seen sometimes devotees struggle with the fourth principle and acquiesce to sex. And that's the advice that's given to the wife. Well, just acquiesce to your husband's desires. But unfortunately, just physical intimacy, sexuality, it does not necessarily equate a healthy relationship. Because in the outside world, sexuality is completely normal, and the divorce rate is 50%. And sometimes in our society, the divorce rate is even higher, which begs a much larger question. So it's very important, especially for leaders or mentors, helping devotees struggle with that kind of an issue, it's very important to give them advice that they have to make sure and have many different avenues for affection and connection, especially like intellectual, emotional, shared activities. All those things are very important for creating a very healthy, holistic connection. And the aspect of physical connection, that's going to be there unless they're like total paramahamsas.
But in itself doesn't create connection and doesn't sustain relationships. No. You needed them all.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think, as you pointed out, it's also important for devotees to remember that a physical connection does not necessarily need to be sex. There's so many other ways, you can have that connection, hugging someone, holding their hand, just, giving someone a shoulder rub. And I think sometimes when people deprive themselves of any type of physical connection, that's also when, then later on, they flip to another extreme, because it's actually unhealthy for most people, I would say, to be in a relationship and to deny yourself any type of, physical affection. So I think that is, also an extreme that we should be wary of. And also when we try and discuss these issues and advise people, that we balanced, as you said, in what we advise to them. And lastly, I would just say, I think emphasizing the importance of having connections, in various forms is important for people when they're thinking about getting married, especially within the devotee community, because we have sometimes seen a tendency where especially men leaving the brahmachari ashram feel that the main reason why they need to get married is because they want the physical connection. Mm-hmm. And I think when you go into marriage thinking that this person's role is to provide this for me, and that's their main, their main function in my life, I think you're setting yourself up, for a very difficult marriage.
Then it can be problematic.
Yes, I think absolutely.
So you're saying that we all need to realize that connection is much larger than that. And maybe that one's shouting at me right now, but there's more to it than that.
Shadia, you're on mute.
Well, as you said, physical connection is part of a romantic relationship, but we should not mistake that will create and sustain, a relationship. It can create an attraction, but not a relationship. So I think it's important that we realize that.
In that, this topic really underscores the need and importance for premarital education, and also education for preparation for marriage, which I think should be somehow included in brahmachari curriculum. We've actually done grihastha courses in different places in the world where the temple leaders or the brahmachari leader will have the brahmacharis attend the grihastha seminar on marriage, either because they realize they will get married, most of them will get married, and also B, they're going to be preaching to grihastas, and they need to understand and be a little sensitive to the issues that grihastas face, and that'll actually facilitate their preaching and also greatly help them not to preach in ways that are going to be detrimental to grihastha ashram, which unfortunately happens.
And it helps them get a more holistic picture of what's ahead and really what's involved. And so we've had some of those brahmacharis come back on day 2 and 3 and say, hey, we're getting along better in the brahmachari ashram. This is helping us in all our relationships. Yeah. And we've had a brahmachari or two come up to us 5-6 years later. They said, I decided grihastha life is just not for me. Too much work. I decided I'm staying brahmachari. So just being able to make a well-rounded decision, I'm just reiterating that, Sardi, is what's definitely necessary.
Thank you. I think that's a very important thing about, brahmacharis or somebody considering, moving on to the next phase, having that education, because I think we've seen, a lot in the devotee community, haven't we? People assume that I've had the brahmachari training, therefore I'm this sort of very, not elevated necessarily, I'm very, regulated personality that can take on responsibility, but then the grihastha ashram, then they find, is a completely different ballpark, as we say. So I think that kind, and also very importantly, you mentioned that interaction they then need to have as a preacher in preaching capacities with the grihasthas. I think it's absolutely paramount. I'm glad you're actually doing some work with brahmachari ashrams, because I'm sure, it will be very, very helpful in years to come. They may not realize it immediately. So we spoke a bit about creating those positive connections and different aspects of connections, so spiritual, emotional, physical connections. So I just wanted to move on to the next part, not so pleasant, but we need to talk about disconnection, because often we see people establish very strong connections, but then maybe a couple of months down the line or a couple of years down the line, there is that disconnection. People don't feel that they are as connected as they used to be, for instance. So what, from the experience in your counseling and the devotee care work you've done, what do you think that causes couple to disconnect?
There are 4 things from our observation and also from research that shows there's 4 specific patterns which are very detrimental to relationships, and one of them is criticism. And it's quite a no-brainer, because we understand to criticize or blaspheme a devoted Lord is an offense against the holy name. And sometimes we don't realize that also includes our spouse. And so it's detrimental in terms of our Vaishnava philosophy, in terms of not understanding that, I'm criticizing my wife, but actually, the deity is also in her heart. And so it just totally negates whatever level of Krishna consciousness I have. And criticism is also very destructive for relationship, because the response to criticism is defensiveness. When we're criticized, it's the natural response is to become defensive, which is another thing that's very detrimental to relationships. It just creates a negative spiral, which is very, very unhealthy. And so those 2 things are very detrimental. It just completely breaks down communication, creates negative feelings. It just creates a very a large withdrawal in the sense of value in the relationship when those kind of interactions occur.
And, we're talking here about connection. And largely the criticism or the defensiveness comes up when we're not connecting and understanding the other person, or maybe even ourselves, what our needs are. Maybe we're not understanding our needs clearly, so we're frustrated and we speak a criticism. So connection is also being able to connect with yourself, to understand yourself and what we need, so that I can express my needs in a better way. Because if I'm just expressing, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, of course he's going to get defensive, because he's trying to be a good partner and a good husband, and that's making him feel really like a big failure. So he wants to, save face and defend himself. That's not what I was thinking. I didn't mean that, Yeah, but you're not listening, and it's just the whole spiral. So it also it results in negative communication, but it starts with not being fully connected. So the connection, the communication, it has so many possibilities along the way.
You can also look at those interactions in terms of the modes of material nature. If the opposite of criticism would be, I could say you never do that. XYZ. Or I can make a request that, if you could do XYZ, it would really add value to my life in such and such a way. So rather than be a criticism, it becomes a way in which your partner can see there's some activity, something they can do that would add value to your life. And that's a lot easier to respond to.
And you feel good about it.
You feel good about it, yeah. So if you look at those two interactions, the criticism is obviously in the mode of ignorance and passion, and making that request is a lot more in the mode of goodness. And why is that important to understand that? It's important to understand that because we understand philosophically, if we actually want to attain Krishna, we have to come to pure goodness. Because his nature is Shuddha Sattva. If we want to attain Krishna, we have to develop that nature of Shuddha Sattva. And so Prabhupada describes that in the Bhagavad Gita. By practice, one can come to the mode of goodness. So again,
Grihastha ashram leaves lots of opportunity for practice.
Yeah. So for making spiritual advances, for developing those qualities of the mode of goodness. So it is a very important.
Your question was what sort of things cause disconnection, and my husband was describing how that criticism causes it and being defensive causes it. And so we need to take a look and see, are these things in my relationship? Because they are causing some disconnection. And research has shown if they keep up and they get more and more pronounced, you probably won't be able to continue with your relationship. So it's very good to weed them out early, not only for your relationship, but also for your spiritual life and your relationship with Krishna, because they're connected. So sometimes when criticism isn't handled properly and the person can get, and it's met with defensiveness, then couples can develop a sort of contempt where it's not just the action of the person, it's the person themselves that you're disliking. So when we get to the point where there's contempt entering into our relationships, that's a really, really big red flag. Because if it's in there a lot, you're not going to be able to sustain relationships. So catching contempt when it's very small is very essential. And one way that you can do that is by, again, requesting what you do need and appreciating the other person for being able to do it. So we need to counteract that contempt with some sort of appreciation. The problem is when it's too much in there, it's hard to appreciate. So then you kind of need to start with, explaining what you could appreciate if they could do it, making requests.
You want to nip it in the bud. We live in an area which is quite prone to forest fires, and the local fire chief came up and he was talking to us, and he was describing that a fire might start out this size, and he said it doubles. I think he said every 50 seconds. So it's this big. 1 minute later, it's that big. Another minute is like 4 times that big, and it just exponentially just expands. So if you don't learn to be able to express your needs, as Uttama is saying, you can develop resentment that my spouse, they should know what I need, even though I never expressed it, because they love me. And then you start to become resentful that they're not meeting that need that you've never expressed fully and in a polite way. And then
so part of that's taking responsibility for, responding better and stating our needs and looking internally and seeing what we do need so we can be clear.
And there's one other thing that can be quite detrimental to close relationships in marriages, it's defensiveness. And defensiveness means that one party just withdraws and doesn't express their feelings or emotions or engage in dialogue. And generally, it's the males that will do that. And the reason that happens,
Hare Krishna, dear devotees. It seems that Uttama and Partha Prabhus have lost connection, so we will just wait for them to reconnect. But we do hope thus far it's been insightful. I certainly feel that I am learning a lot myself. And if you've got any reflections to share while we wait for them to reconnect.
Yeah, I think it makes me think about that saying actually, it's not what you say, how you say it, the point that they raised about, not pointing out, sorry, not refraining from pointing out any flaws or any mistakes or things that you feel that you need to point out, but pointing it out in the mode of goodness. So it's not saying, oh, you're not doing this, that, or the other, but when you do this, you make me feel XYZ. So it's often not what you say, but how you say it. And also the other point around having that, sort of deep understanding about your own needs. So you're able to recognize when your needs aren't met and being able to be that mature person to articulate it in a helpful sort of productive manner to the partner. Because I think communication is something that's very much overlooked, but I think probably one of the main causes or reasons that cause not just romantic relationships, any type of relationships, to break down. Because often it could take years to build up a friendship, a partnership, a connection, but it could literally take a split second, to break it. So I think people often, what's the word, don't take that much importance or don't pay much emphasis on the power of words really and power of communication. It could literally make or break a relationship, was what I took really.
Yeah, that's very true. And I mean, creating a relationship of any sorts, whether, romantic or friendship, a working partnership, it does take years. And as you said, you can destroy the trust within a few seconds if you communicate in an unconscious and harsh way. And that's why, as they were emphasizing, it's so important that we strive to become more thoughtful and conscious and communicate our needs in the mode of goodness and coming from a place of understanding our needs, in the first place. Thank you for joining us again, Uttama and Partha Prabhu. Dee and I just quickly shared some of our reflections from what you've shared thus far.
we had a disconnect because of some
No,
incompatibility issue.
that's okay. Probably we
Which
were
was actually,
reflecting on actually, the points that you made around, the criticism and being defensive
Mhm.
and taking one's responsibility for what, knowing and
Yes,
understanding your needs. I think at the heart of it, what we were just saying is the actually communication and not often what you say, how you say, and how
yes,
important
yes,
communication is building and
yes,
sustaining positive connections. So given that we've
yes.
spoken a little bit about creating and cultivating those connections and also what things could cause those disconnections, how do we deal with a connection if there was to be a disconnection that occurred? So somebody, criticizes the other person too much and,
Mhm.
they withdraw, like you mentioned, Prabhu,
Mhm.
particularly
Yes.
males tend to do that. So what could we do to help rebuild that connection if there was some sort of disconnection?
I
Well, when
think
I start complaining, he says to me, "Could you say that again in a way that I could hear it better?"
um, the reason why men withdraw, and sometimes it's referred to as stonewalling, it's like they put up this big brick wall. And men, we understand from our philosophy that men, they want to be the protector. And so our duty, our nature is that we want to protect, especially the person we love and care for the most, our wife, and also our family. And when men hear criticism from one of the most important persons in their life, their spouse, that's very painful for them. It tends to make us feel like a failure, that I have failed in making my wife feel protected, loved, and satisfied. And generally that dynamic happens because of a failure of understanding the different needs of men and women. And we were talking earlier about the importance of the emotional aspect of relationships. And that is extremely important for women, that sense of validation and being able to express their emotions and feel understood. That's extremely important to women. For men, that's not such an essential need, although we also need that for our mental health and our peace. But for women, it is essential. And it can be problematic because men have a very logical, analytical nature. And often when men get married, their wife comes to them and begins to express something. And in reality, what she is looking for is some emotional connection, some validation and understanding. And that's all she's looking for. We tend to interpret that, due to our logical natures, as this is a problem I can solve for my dear wife. And we start to give a logical solution. At which point we see her becoming frustrated. And she says, "You don't understand." And we're kind of blindsided by that, because I heard your problem and I'm trying to give you a solution, but we don't understand. That's not what they're looking for. And because we don't understand that, we get frustrated and maybe we just go off in a huff. And again, because that's such a strong need for women, she'll come again with some emotional need. Again, we try to provide some solution, and we have this repeated exchange where the man gets frustrated and the woman gets teary-eyed and disturbed. And then the wife will start to complain, "You never talk to me." And the man's thinking, every time I do, it's a disaster. So he stops. He stops like engaging in conversation because he doesn't see a way out of it.
And that's where stonewalling comes in.
And that dynamic can totally destroy relationships if you don't understand what each other's needs are and meet each other's needs. It can destroy relationships. So the man just has to understand it's not a problem that he has to solve. He might just have to say, "Wow, that must have been really tough for you," and just give her a little hug, and she's probably going to be okay. And if it is a problem, she'll tell him. And the woman needs to understand it's very important for men to have that understanding that they're making their spouse feel loved and protected. And so if she can just say, "I just need you to understand me, that'll make me feel loved and protected," we can get that. But if they say, "Well, you never listen to me, you don't understand, you never understand me," that just makes us feel like a failure. And men will either just withdraw or they'll become frustrated and angry. So that it's a simple dynamic. If you understand it, it can go a long way to a peaceful, stable relationship. If you don't understand it, it can become like a wedge that can completely disconnect you, and you can end up living in parallel, separate worlds and have very little communication.
So I believe your question was, how to prevent those. So what he's explaining is understanding the dynamic helps to prevent it. And to be clear, take responsibility, be clear on what your need is. Because, we're conditioned to think that the other person, if they love us, they should know. And if they do it all right, that means that they love us. And if they do it wrong, it means they don't love us. But it's not really like that. We have to take responsibility to understand our needs and communicate them clearly. And then it's easy for the other person to respond well. So that's a big part of repairing disconnection. Another really big part is in that taking responsibility to understand what each one of us needs to soothe ourselves when we're in a lower state of consciousness. Whether that's a freeze response, a flight response, a fight response, whatever it is, we need to be able to recognize it, that this is welling up in me. And so my emotions are responding. Because when my emotions are responding strongly, we secrete like cortisol and adrenaline so that we can get ourselves out of the situations. And that cortisol and adrenaline, it floods our higher consciousness so that we don't have access to it. So we can't see what we need to do. We say terrible things. We don't even remember that we said them later. We're arguing over differences because we don't have the connection with our higher self. So we need to take responsibility to recognize when we're in a less high state of consciousness that's more governed by emotional states, which are governed by unconscious bodily reactions that are just kind of forcing you to do those unconsciously because of stored memory of pain. So recognizing when those things are happening to us and being able to take a break, because when our emotions are flooded, our body and our minds need minimum 20 minutes of quiet time where we're self-soothing for the chemicals, to filter out so we can access our higher consciousness. And sometimes we don't want to give the person the space to do it. Don't leave me. You have to stay and, work this out. We can't go to bed till we figure this out. But the person just needs some time to get in their higher state of consciousness. And if we're talking like that, we probably also need some time to get in a higher state of consciousness. So taking responsibility for understanding when that's happening to us and finding the way in which our body soothes. It can be different for different people. And so that's a big part.
We were explaining that to a couple recently, and the next week when we were talking with them, the lady said that was a real game changer for them, just realizing if they de-escalated, they could come back and talk about the issues civilly.
But when you're escalated or one of you's escalated, it's going to go nowhere. You might as well get some duct tape.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Solution to everything, duct tape.
It's a creative solution. Uttama Prabhu, I was wondering, for those of us that might not be so familiar, with the different responses to argument or disagreement, which you said is kind of like, lower consciousness, in that, as you said, because of certain chemicals that are actually being released in our brain, we can't access like our higher, even mental functioning. So you mentioned, I think, fight, flight, we've got freezing, and they also have fawning. So could you maybe just elaborate a little on those four and what do they look like in a relationship? Because I think that makes it easier for us to identify when we are, falling victim to one of those responses.
Well, I think a fight is probably fairly obvious. You're, engaging either physically or verbally, and an outpouring of words, or hopefully not physically fighting.
In freeze, that's generally going to be the man who wants to stonewall and withdraw and not say anything.
Although, women, we can get like that when we just can't access our emotions and we just like kind of shut down. So it happens to us too. And that maybe, so flight is when you just want to get out of here. And, we apply that sometimes in the wrong way when it can be applied well. Like we don't want to tolerate the discomfort we're feeling. So we just want to, we get this urge to get out of here. That could also be super soul, telling you need to take a little space, so we can use that to our advantage. And fawning is when you just do whatever the other person wants in order to feel safe.
And one way you can be a little perceptive to that coming over you is if you feel your pulse rate increasing. Actually, if you have a smart watch that has a pulse meter, if you get a little some issue with your spouse, you could just put on your pulse meter, and if you notice the pulse rate go beyond 100 beats per minute, you're disconnecting from your higher logic and reasoning. And also, you probably feel you're maybe getting a little clammy, a little tight-chested. So you want to be perceptive of those bodily symptoms, because it's telling you you need to just do an emotional reset.
Thank you so much. I think it's key that we become conscious of how we are reacting, and what's happening in the body and what's happening in the mind. Because as you said, those responses in themselves are not problematic, but if you're going to allow that response then to dictate how you're dealing with the argument or the conflict, then when it becomes problematic. Because I think, for instance, if you are going into a fight response, that can just be indicative that you're feeling strongly about something, which is not wrong per se. And if you want to go into flight, as you said, it might be the super soul telling you that you need space, but saying to your partner, I need a break, maybe I need to go for a walk, is different than saying to them that I want to end the relationship, and I never want to see you again, I don't want to discuss this, and that's kind of like allowing that response to take over completely. And I think even with fawning, if you see that happening, you could use it as a learning moment for yourself, where you can ask yourself, why do I feel this need to comply to whatever my spouse wants? And what is it that I actually need? So I think those responses in itself, we can definitely work with and see them as feedback. I also just wanted to ask if you could give some examples of what we can do for self-soothing. I know that you mentioned, Uttama, that it's different for every person, but I think if we can have some suggestions that might help people to understand what are tools that they can explore with.
Well, a good place to start is with deeper breathing, especially when your exhales are a little bit longer than your inhales, because that can help to dissipate that cortisol and adrenaline. So that's very calming. Also, lying down in yoga nidra posture. There's no way you can lie down and feel like fighting. Like sometimes if you see a couple fighting, you just tell them, lie down on the floor, now fight. They won't be able to do it because you can't fight when you're lying down. So, some other people, they maybe need a little exercise. Like they might need to go for a walk to calm themselves. Somebody else might need to sing at the top of their voice or listen to music, or maybe listen to a podcast or something. There's somebody else saying something so their mind's not taking over. Yoga can help. Like I said, the yoga nidra pose. You have to be a little bit intuitive and see which things have helped me in the past. And there's lots of Google resources for things like that also.
It's important to realize that's what you're doing. You're trying to just reset your nervous system. You want to go somewhere and find a place or something you can do that'll help you just self-soothe. And self-soothing means you don't want to ruminate about the challenge or conflict that you've been having and think about, well, she said that, I'm going to respond with this. You're not going to self-soothe if you're ruminating about the problem. You just want to put it down on the shelf, self-soothe, pick up the challenge. Okay, let's address this again now from a little more sane platform.
Thank you. I think that's a very useful definition of self-soothing. And I think what became clear from the examples that you gave, Uttama Prabhu, is that because the body has gone into a certain state and the mind has gone into the certain state, we also need to move the body in a different way. Because you said, like, lie down, deep breathing, going for a walk, maybe doing some stretches. All of those are physical things. And I think
you actually need physical solutions at that point, not
which
mental solutions. Yeah.
I think it's very useful. And as Prabhu was pointing out, it must be something that's going to, kind of switch your mind onto something else and stop that ruminating pattern. So that was very useful. And as you said, I think we should maybe, before we get into a conflict situation, we should have that self-awareness to know which activities do calm me down and help me to, to just calm my mind and soothe, intense emotions.
And as a couple, it's very helpful to be aware of that as a dynamic, and that it's, if it hasn't happened already, it's eventually going to happen, very likely, in your relationship. And you want to have some strategy and agreement that, okay, when that happens, this is what we're going to do.
We're going to take a break.
Yeah.
And when we're soothed, we will come back and discuss it. Not we're going to take a break and forget about it and let it build up in, in our bank account of negative interactions. Because that's why we can't let each other go, because we're afraid of that. So you have to have a strategy. Usually you can't even talk when you're upset. Sometimes we just tell people, just have some kind of a sign that we need to take a little break, and an agreement that sometime, usually within about 24 hours or so, maximum 48, that we'll discuss it again when we're calm.
Thank
I
you,
think
Prabhu. Lots of very good. Oh, sorry.
So no,
Sorry.
I think it's very good to decide upon the strategy for conflict resolution before you get into conflict, and to also commit to it. So I think that's definitely a very useful tip. Sorry, Dee, please continue.
No, I was saying that, that there were a lot of very good practical hints and tips that might seem very obvious, but the point that Sharadi made, but when you're in a situation, people get very worked up, and, you tend to forget the simplest of the things and get things escalate. On that note, I know Pratha Prabhu touched upon the idea of the men withdrawing, or it's a very classic freeze symptom for because men think very logically, so it's often their way of fight or flight. They often flight because they can't just deal with it. So what can, whether it's a male or female, what can we do if somebody withdraws? It might be a fight flight freeze reaction, or generally if somebody's way of dealing, some people generally dealing with anything is to withdraw. We see this in colleagues, family members, might not just be in a relationship capacity, but how can we bring things to a positive kind of discussion point, or deal with things when somebody is in a very withdrawal mode?
Well, if they're withdrawn, first we have to honor the fact maybe they do need to withdraw to kind of self-regulate. They once they're self-regulated, we could maybe start the conversation with, is there a way I could have said that better? Is there a way I could have, said that in a way that was easier for you to hear and accept? And is there something, maybe there's something I can do for you that will help make it easier for you to listen to me and get what I need in the relationship?
So what can I do help you to help me?
Yeah.
You were touching on avoidance. Like sometimes couples just tend to avoid because they're not comfortable with discussing anything or having arguments. And people who tend to be avoidant, they need to learn ways to communicate that feel safe. So sometimes they do need to be taught ways in which to communicate where they can stay somewhat connected, because connection is a big part of feeling safe. We feel safe when we feel connected. They're kind of intricately go together. So avoidant people need to find positive ways to engage and to learn how to express themselves and feel understood, and that's mutual. So sometimes they need to be, taught reflective listening techniques, or positive ways of resolving conflict so they don't have to feel stressed about the conflict. And then on the opposite side, you have those people who were not avoiding at all. They're just like full on, full in, and they need to learn how to like calm down, step back, take it a little bit slower. So
it's very interesting that couples may have conflicts, and research actually shows that generally what couples are fighting about, or what makes the challenge into a conflict, is not so much the challenge that's on the table, but somehow because they don't feel understood, they don't feel connected, they don't feel loved, and that amplifies the problem and makes it into something very great. And just like from our own Vaishnava theology, we understand when you engage in devotional service, the ocean of material existence shrinks to the amount of water in the hoofprint of a calf. So we might have some challenge, but if we can use Rupa Goswami's recommendation, this loving exchange of revealing our mind in confidence and hearing in confidence, actually learning to do that properly, that I can understand you're thinking a specific way about some issue. I might not agree. I can understand how you feel that way, and I can honor that. I might not agree, but I can make you confident that I understand you. And similarly, you can understand me, although you don't agree, and make me feel confident that you understand me. And then we can agree to disagree and still be friends or still love each other because we understand each other. And couples in marriage, they can have up to 69% of their challenges that are what are called perpetual problems, differences in nature.
Values.
Like I'm fanatically punctual and she's the complete opposite.
Not complete, just a little bit looser.
And so that's like a perpetual problem in a relationship. But we learn to honor it and respect it. And we actually had a dialogue on it once, trying to figure why is this creating so much tension. And then finally we realized it boiled down to we were both trying to do something that was going to be relaxing. So for me, relaxing was going an extra hour early to the airport.
Like extra
like
hour?
Not 2, but 3 hours. In case there was a flat tire, you got a ticket on the way from the police or something. And then I can go sit down in the airport and relax. And for her, relaxing mean cleaning the house before we left. So
I'm not
stressed.
stressed.
She would know when she came home, she could be relaxed because the house is going to be clean. So both of our goals was relaxing. And we understood that. Somehow it made it easier to just negotiate the thing on the fly, just understanding each other. So
now he helps me clean the house, and then I go with him and sit at the airport 2 hours too early.
I'm with Partha Prabhu. I'd happily join you in any of your travels. I'm that uber punctual person, that turns up, way early than necessary. But I think the very important point you mentioned was, I think Uttama Prabhu said, it's actually finding ways, or I think cultivating opportunities for that person in question to communicate safely, isn't it? And also so that if you have that mutual understanding, and I think respect probably also plays a huge part, respecting the other person's opinion, not discounting their kind of thoughts and feelings. Like you said, right, like Partha Prabhu mentioned, you might agree to disagree in the end, but it's how you disagree and the process which you go through as a couple to come to that conclusion to disagree is potentially more important than actually disagreeing on the end result itself, isn't it? Thank you.
I had a brief follow-up question. So you mentioned, you shared with us that you have, different ideas about what does it mean to feel relaxed before going on a trip. I mean, you did have a discussion about it, but it seems that it's not going to evaporate from the relationship. So do we need to accept that there's going to be certain conflicts in our relationship that's not going to get resolved? Is that healthy or unhealthy?
That's totally normal. Research shows that couples can have up to 69% of their challenges are these perpetual things that keep popping up. It's totally normal. And these couples can be happy in their relationship because they learn to respect their differences and have an ongoing dialogue on the fly to work those things out. It's totally normal. Totally normal.
You just learn how to negotiate them a little bit faster as you go along.
And
laugh about it. At first it's, but after a while it's like, hey, that's just the way he is, and laugh about it and you work with what you have to do and you carry on. Right?
And the research shows that often these problems are solved not so much by the facts and figures and is it going to take that long to change the tire or what, blah blah blah, but generally they're solved by couples understanding each other's feelings. That sounds counterintuitive, but actually when you understand each other's feelings, you connect. Right? You have that, and which Rupa Goswami said, it's this loving exchange of understanding each other. And that he just says that's devotional service. So we're having a discussion on something we disagree on, that can be a loving exchange and devotional service, because we're doing that because we understand Krishna, he wants us to have these kind of healthy dialogues. And when we do that, as Vaishnavas, Krishna can enter into that dialogue and help us find some way to manage it. So it's totally normal. It's not something not to be feared. Conflict, I was just thinking about that during the month of Damodar. We have a 1 month celebration about a family conflict. And Radha and Krishna, they're always having these conflicts, but they're repairing it. They're coming back together. And
it's increasing the connection.
Yeah, it's increasing the connection.
Thank you. I think that was very useful. I think the essence is that we need to become comfortable with conflict. And
we have to become comfortable with discomfort.
You have to be comfortable with discomfort, comfortable with conflict, and then also, not necessarily see conflict as an issue or something that's inevitably needs to lead to pain or disconnection, but potentially, if managed properly, it can lead to connection. As Prabhu was pointing out, it can be used as an opportunity to really discuss each other's feelings, and I think what something means to you. But, as you pointed out, sometimes it's not about the fact, for instance, it might not be like some person might be, very particular about, having the house in a certain way. And it might not actually be about, having things in a certain position, but it means to them that they are in control of the environment. It means to them, that they are feeling that, they're calm and everything is contained. So I think it's understanding the meaning behind, actions and the meaning, behind people's, needs that they express.
Sometimes it can be like a hidden meaning behind some action or something. We had this issue once about the household garbage many, many years ago. And Uttama would take the household trash from under the sink and put it on the floor. And in my family, either me, my mom, my dad, my sister would take it out. It was never any issue. So that's what I was used to. So I was noticing that she was always just leaving the trash there for me to take out. And after a while, I thought, well, I should just leave it for her to do it sometime. So I left it, started leaving it there, and it would just sit there like till the next day.
Or the day after.
The day after. And so it was creating this tension. So we had this discussion, well, what's going on? So she explained to me that when she grew up, she used to see her father take out the trash. And she saw, as a child, she saw that just some little loving gesture, some little service, her dad did for her mom. And she grew up seeing that.
It's almost like a ritual in my mind. My mom would put it the back steps. My dad would go to work. He'd take the garbage. It was like a ritual they had. It was a loving exchange in my mind as a kid,
And so I remember this really vividly. She doesn't remember this, but I can remember this super vividly. She said to me, when you take out the trash, it means as much to me as when you built the house. I just thought, wow, I can make you that happy by just taking this little bag, like, 300 yards to the dumpster. No problem. I happily been doing that for 50 years. So there was some meaning behind it.
Thanks.
So it's, sometimes we can be introspective and discover, why those interactions, what's happening in the background. Maybe there's some hidden meaning, some value behind it. And understanding and discussing those things help to resolve those things.
I think that's very valuable.
Again, it's talking about the feelings behind it.
I think that's very valuable, trying to understand which small actions are really valuable to your partner because they carry a certain meaning. And, I think, of course, it's good to do things which you just enjoy doing for your partner and you would appreciate, but it's also so important to tune into what is it that they really value. Because it's often small things, but for them, it's very significant. And I think also clarifying the meaning. I have one friend that once told me she was extremely upset with her partner giving her a cactus for one of their relationship anniversaries. And then I asked her, why was this upsetting to you? And she was saying, it's not a very beautiful plant. It's not very colorful. It's not very exciting. Does he think that our relationship is like this? But then I asked her, maybe you should ask him. she asked him, what does he see? Like, what does a cactus mean to him? And then she did ask him, and then he was saying that, a cactus is very resilient, and a cactus, can stand the test of time. So for him, it had a completely different meaning. But she was extremely upset about the cactus. So I found it, I think in relationships, we have so many cactus moments where we attribute significantly different meaning to either actions, or objects. So it's just good to be conscious that our conditioning is different.
And be curious instead of furious. That's the new catchword, in psychology. Be curious instead of furious.
Yeah, that's very good advice. Now I want to ask you.
We just lost Sardia.
Oh, Sharadia, I think probably clicked a button that was not meant for clicking or by accident, but we can carry on the discussion. I think, yeah, it was a very important points that you made about around compatibility and that idea of understanding what is important to the other person and reciprocating positively. On that note, I know we also spoke to it a certain degree around you taking responsibility to understand what is important for you and what isn't important, how you manage it and take responsibility of communicating what is important to you to your partner. Related to that, I wanted to pick up on, we also spoke about how when we get triggered we should use certain techniques such as lying down to kind of calm ourselves down. But is there anything else that we could do to stop such triggers? Individuals have different types of triggers that could negatively impact relationships. So what tips could you do for people to overcome those triggers so that it doesn't get in the way of healthy positive connections?
Well, triggers can be milder and more acute in different individuals. And if someone's had a lot of trauma in their past, their triggers may be, what do they call them? Hair triggers instead of, something that takes a little longer to detonate. So because the response of the trigger sometimes feels stronger than our capability to overcome it, we shouldn't feel stigmatized to get some help, because it is really hard sometimes to overcome some of those triggers. And so if we're finding that, deep breathing and self-soothing and things like that aren't working, perhaps we need to, talk to somebody else about it, discover what the underlying pain is. And maybe even we need some counseling. And counseling has gone a long way in the last 10, 15 years with trauma. It's like leaps and bounds of advancement in trauma counseling in many, many ways. Not just talk therapy, but lots of them are physical, somatic healing and things like that, because they understand the triggers originate in the body. The body reaction is first. So you may need professional help if it's just too much for you.
Sometimes devotees are reluctant to seek help for those kind of challenges, and they may feel that, well, chanting the holy name, it's the panacea for all problems, which Prabhupada actually says in the Bhagavatam. Or they may feel that, well, if I think about taking counseling, well, that's going to minimize the holy name. So is the holy name sufficient? 100% yes, it is. And I base that upon one statement that Prabhupada made in the Bhagavatam. He was talking about different sciences like psychology and chemistry. He said, when these sciences are used wholly and totally in the service of the Lord, his exact words are, they factually become Hari Kirtan. They factually become Hari Kirtan. So utilizing something like counseling is an extremely important tool which we can use to facilitate our devotional life by helping us uproot and understand some problematic weeds we have, which are crowding out our devotional creeper. And so that it's actually a part of our spiritual life and a part of kirtan to actually uproot those things that are stifling our spiritual life, so we can relate better as Vaishnavas. We can create a situation where we will make less offenses because of those kind of emotional triggers.
And it'll enable us to chant more purely
Yes.
because those anarthas are out of the way. And, you know, not to scare you from marriage, but to encourage you that it's a great process for cleaning your heart. Those anarthas come out more when you're in close, intimate relationships. You may not experience them just in your friendships, but when you're closely connected with somebody, it's going to hit those deeper trigger points that may not be coming out. So you can think, okay, marriage is a deep, dark well. It just makes me become like a negative, nasty person. Is that the case? Nothing's making you do that. It's just awakening you that those anarthas are in my heart and I need to do something about them. It's not the fault of the other person.
Mm-hmm.
They're there in my heart. And if this relationship, if we can have loving, connected relationships, that is so helpful for clearing that trauma, because connection is what really is the cure for trauma.
Mm.
Thank you, Prabhu. It was really interesting when you actually touched upon the point that I wanted to follow up about counseling, because some people, breathing, taking deep breaths or lying down might not be enough if you've got that past trauma that you're carrying
Mm-hmm.
within. But
Mm-hmm.
despite the points that Partha Prabhu mentioned, that we should always seek things like counseling as something that is helpful towards our devotional practice, and that's not something that's watering down our chanting or sadhana. Some people are still reluctant to seek that, external support or counseling,
Mm-hmm.
because in some communities, actually, it's often a taboo or looked frowned upon. Oh, you're going to a relationship counselor, so your relationship must be falling apart. So there's some sort of stigma to an extent, even in the Western society, attached towards counseling, despite people openly talking about going to therapy, for instance. So how can couples overcome this and actually see counseling a little bit more positively and encourage each other? Because it could be that one partner wants to go into counseling but the other doesn't. So if you're in that sort of a situation, how would you go about dealing, taking that first step towards seeking that help? Because taking the first step could be
Mm-hmm.
a very big step for some people.
A
It's
lot of times it'll be the men who are reluctant to go to counseling, and it's just like if we were going to have do a seminar, and if we entitled the seminar "How to Improve Your Communication in Marriage," all the ladies are going to want to go, and all the men are going to go, "Whoa, I don't want to go there." But we entitled one of the main seminars we do, "Strengthening the Bonds That Free Us," and one of the things that help us strengthen the bond, it's communication. But the goal of the seminar is actually on connection. It's not just on communication. So if the men can be made to feel assured and comfortable, this is going to help us with our connection. This is going to help us with our state of connection. And again, generally it is the men who tend to be fearful of that.
it's pretty common that one person's more reluctant to come to counseling than the other. And so usually as a counselor, you address that, what's your reluctance? What are you worried about? How can we help you? There's ways in which counselors have for overcoming the more reluctant partner. And if your partner is just too reluctant to come, even one person making improvements in themselves can affect the relationship. So you can always go yourself for counseling if your partner doesn't want to come along.
Thank you, Prabhu. I think I really like the point you mentioned, Pastor Prabhu. Strength, that counseling and this support is about strengthening the bonds that free us, and often it's not what you do, again, how you frame it. So framing
Mm-hmm.
counseling as, this is not because I see that the relationship is in trouble, so to speak. Let's go so we can better improve our communication and, kind of strengthen the bond we've already got. Because often it's the way you frame it. If you frame things in a positive direction, there's often, the other person, the likelihood of the other person buying it probably is higher than,
Yeah.
the way you frame
We
it
just tell
negatively.
men there'll be more tools in your toolkit. Men always like more tools.
Good point. Thank you.
I have a quick follow-up question. Would you recommend that couples wait until they feel they've got an issue or a conflict that they cannot resolve before they go to counseling?
From the counselor's point of view, I wish you'd come earlier. So you're making it difficult.
One of the reasons we do the premarital education, it helps couples realize problems are normal, and helps couples realize you have a lot of things in common, but you do also have some differences. And it helps them realize that, the honeymoon stage is going to wear off. They're going to discover their differences. And it equips them with some skills that, okay, you have these differences. Here's some skills that are going to help you work these things out. And conflict is inevitable. And again, there's ways you can work that out. So it gives them the confidence from the start that, okay, it's normal to have problems and there's ways to work it out. And also often go away with the understanding that, okay, if there is something we can't work out, we can go somewhere for help.
Yeah.
And so getting that from the beginning of the relationship is very important. Statistically, couples don't go for counseling until they're 6 years into a problem.
And then it's quite hard to resolve.
Yeah, by then the problem is very ingrained and it's multiple layers, and it takes a lot of time to kind of go through those layers and work everything out. So the sooner the better. And I think if couples can realize that, well, let's get equipped. Like, again, I was saying, we live in an area that's prone for forest fires. So we actually have a volunteer firefighter crew. We do training. We know exactly what to do. We're equipped. So it's like that with marriage. There's going to be little fires, and you can get some knowledge and skills how to put those fires out before they turn into something huge.
Thank you so much. I think it would be very beneficial if, as a society, we could normalize, having counseling, permanently. I'm not saying that you need counseling regularly, but, maybe once a month, maybe, every second month, just have a session, and then, have an opportunity to find out what are those little, conflicts or issues. Because I think sometimes you only become aware of something being an issue when it's actually, escalated quite a lot already.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so much easier if you deal with it, when it hasn't become endemic to your relationship dynamics yet. Now, I want to ask if you've got advice for what is another, I think, common problematic relationship dynamic, and that's if we have one partner that is committed and that is supportive, but despite of that, the other partner is feeling insecure.
Whoop.
You're muted, Dee. There.
I think you can. I think the point about is that Shraddha was going to make was that. Oh, there she's back. I'll let her ask her question again. Shraddha, so sorry, you got cut off halfway through.
Very interesting. Yeah, for some strange reason, each time I try to ask this question, I get disconnected. But it's okay.
The universe trying to tell something.
Some sign. It's some sign. So my question was, we've got one partner that is committed, that is supportive, that is accepting, but despite that, the other partner is feeling insecure, insecure in themselves and insecure in the relationship. So how would you advise to deal with that dynamic?
It seems to me that you're saying the other person is working hard, and the other person's still feeling insecure. So that, just from those facts only, lead me to think that that person has some insecurity from childhood or previous life circumstances, and that perhaps they could do with some help sorting through that, whether that's a counselor or some trusted friend or something, just to be able to increase their self-value and self-worth so that they can sometimes even receive, that care and attention. And insecurities can be quite deep-rooted, and we do need to examine what's the stories that we're telling ourselves and what's the part that we're playing. So I would probably start with looking at that. And then when you understand what that is, you can communicate, oh, I know you're trying to help me when you did that, but what would really help me is if you did this, because the person's trying their best, but you have to be able to guide them on what actually works. And to do that, you have to know.
Thank you so much. I think what stood out from this response that you gave and to many other responses is that to make a relationship work, self-awareness is absolutely key. To understand when you can just apply a technique and when you actually need, to find help, and to understand when, the problem is the relationship dynamic or whether the problem is something in your psychology, to have clarity about it, because you'll have to approach it differently, depending on, where the issue is originating from. So that is very helpful. I just wanted to ask one last question to bring I think it was a very interesting discussion to a closure. And that is, what would you say are the key characteristics of a healthy relationship? And what can couples do to develop that healthy relationship in the long term?
I think one important thing they can do is to cultivate the attitude of gratitude and appreciation, and to make a point to express that appreciation and gratitude on some kind of regular basis, daily. Relationships have something which is referred to as an emotional bank account. Every time you have some positive interaction, might be you do some little service for each other, some words of appreciation, some gratitude, just acknowledging the other person's feelings and thoughts. It's like a contribution in that emotional bank account. And relationships, they're based upon many small things often, like those little acts of appreciation, gratitude, service. They create this large emotional bank account. So if you have 100,000 pounds, or you're in South Africa, it's going to be rand. So if you have a big, healthy emotional bank account, if you take out, say, 100 euros or 100 rand, the account's not really impacted. If you have a very low amount of finances in your bank account, and you take, say you have like a $500, 500 euros, 500 rand in your account, you take out 100, that's quite a profound jump. You're gonna feel that. So in the same way, if we have a relationship with a very large positive emotional bank account, there's a lot of healthy reciprocation, appreciation. When the inevitable disconnect happens, little challenge, because you have that positive emotional bank account, it's not so impactful. It helps you to work those things out easier. If you have a very low level of emotional bank account, when the challenge happens, it becomes more amplified because you don't have that positivity. So that cultivating that attitude of gratitude and appreciation, it's very important and very essential in relationships.
I think also I suggested some things earlier, the kindness, the, apologizing and making efforts to improve, understanding, taking the time to understand is a huge thing for making positive relationships. I think that we don't realize that everything needs work. We think it's going to be automatic. We buy into that fairy tale that, you get married and you're going to live happily ever after. But every single thing in life needs a little bit of work, and maintenance, that's the realm of Lord Vishnu because it's the hardest. So we do actually have to understand how supportive and beneficial good, connected, healthy relationships are. And when we understand the benefit, then we will be more likely to take the positive steps and the time to put into cultivating them further. Because we often see that people in good relationships come to our seminars because they want to improve them more. And the people that have lousy ones, they don't even think about it, So understanding the value is really step number one. And then taking the time.
I think also as Vaishnavas, deity worship, like household deity worship and chanting the holy name together are very important, because it helps you realize that, okay, it's not just me versus you, but we have some challenge, and we have to satisfy this. We have to work this out for the satisfaction of the household deity. That we have to cooperate because we're living in Krishna's house. And if we can remember that, it'll make it easier, because we have this responsibility. It's not just my house, not just her house, but it's Krishna's house. He's allowing us to live here, and we're trying to please him in all our activities. And so even in our challenges and conflicts, we have to realize that, well, we have to behave in a way that's going to be pleasing to Krishna.
Then it's not me against him.
Yeah.
It's us against the problem.
There's an interesting marital conflict in the Bhagavatam involving Bhima and Draupadi, when Asvatthama had killed her sons, and Draupadi wanted Asvatthama spared, Bhima wanted him killed, and it was a super tense situation described that Krishna manifests 4 arms to satisfy everyone. And it's described there that Krishna gave Arjuna a hint of the solution. And what that hint was, he said, Arjuna, I want you to find something that's going to satisfy Bhima, Draupadi, and me. So we can take that into our lives, and we have some challenge. Okay, Krishna's going to be satisfied if we both come away from this satisfied that we did the best we could to come up with the best solution. Not that it has to be my way, or she's thinking it has to be her way, but we want to come away thinking Krishna wants us both to be okay with the solution. And that's important. That's a very important spiritual lesson there, that Krishna is also in our relationship. And our connection is actually based on that connection with Krishna.
Thank you very much. That was a very beautiful answer. I have a quick question which is related. We have this term of someone being a functional alcoholic. So it means that a person definitely has a problem with alcohol addiction, but still, they are maybe going to work, they're still, doing the most essential things in life. And it seems sometimes that people can be functional in an unhappy marriage. So it's a state that I've often seen in devotee marriages, where both partners have kind of accepted that we will be unhappy in our marriage, but regardless, we're still going on. We are staying married. We're still doing the essentials, looking after the children, living in one household, etc. But you don't see that, it's a deep, meaningful connection. So I wonder if you could shed some light upon why there is this tendency in the devotee community to regard the relationship and having a relationship like that as not being, problematic to your devotional life. Like, why do we, have so little regard for the value of relationships, or seeing that it's something almost separate from our spiritual life?
So that's noble that they have that sense of duty and they're not ending the relationship. So that's noble. But I think Krishna expects more of us. At least we can be friends. At least we can work together, and at least we can show some care for each other. There's no such thing as a perfect relationship, but at least we can be civil and respectful and kind to each other. And that is extremely important for the children growing up. Often children who grow up in families in which there's a lot of stress and a lot of conflict, they'll grow up thinking they're the cause of the problem. And also those children are likely to emulate those kind of patterns in their life. And to have that consciousness, or just become oblivious to the fact, okay, we're just going to live together and be unhappy ever after, that's what conditioned life is about. Conditioned life means just accepting the lower modes of material nature as reality and normal. So I think all of us need to strive towards the mode of goodness. And what is that going to look like? It doesn't mean a perfect marriage. You're 100% happy all the time. Everything's jolly and joyful, and there's always going to be challenges. But again, at least you can be respectful. You can be friends, amicable. That's important, and that's extremely important for children's, for their mental health and their upbringing, to have at least to see that you care about each other and you can be friends. That's so important. So I think as grihastas, we need to see that as actually a sacred duty, that we need to set that example for the rest of society. Chant Hare Krishna, we go out in the street, chant Hare Krishna and be happy, and I come home, I'm unhappy in my happy life. There's a disconnect there. How effective is my preaching going to be?
Thank you, Prabhu. I think you raised a lot of points from being, cultivating that attitude of gratitude and creating that mutual appreciation for partners, and also being kind, communicating things clearly, and also that point around developing that self responsibility for knowing what you want and what your emotional needs are, and also being able to communicate that very clearly to your partners as way of, how to sustain positive and healthy relationships. And I hope the devotees listening found it helpful, and will all go away trying to work towards creating that positive bank balance that we spoke about earlier, as opposed to the negative bank balances, and also taking into account that no relationship is perfect and no two relationships are the same. I think there's also this, frequently, oh, they have this rosy, or we see that somebody's having a rosy relationship, therefore you automatically compare yours to theirs, and then that causes unnecessary problems. So I hope devotees took some positive things and helpful hints and tips around how to create positive connections, and also most importantly how to build on those created connections, and also sustaining those positive healthy relationships and connections. Is there anything else, Prabhu, either of you wanted to make before we close the session today?
We'd like to thank you for the opportunity to air the importance of the Grahasta Ashram, and to help devotees realize that there's things they can do to always improve their ashram and make it better. And that's something we always want to do eternally, is to become better devotees and serve Krishna in better ways. So we can start now wherever we are in our lives, in our ashrams, to improve things always.
And we do see that the quality of our life is directly related to the quality that we experience in all of our relationships. So they're worth working on.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. On that note, we'll conclude our 20th episode of the Many Wounds podcast. And thank you ever so much for Uttama Prabhu and Partha Prabhu for giving up their time so generously to speak to us about this very important topic. And please do continue to keep up your good work, helping couples, brahmacharis who would become potential grihastas, to continue to go on and have and cultivate positive connections, and to contribute positive towards the society and towards the wider devotee community. Thank you everybody for joining us today. Hope you have a lovely rest of the day. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.